king obeyed, but his obedience was a statistical deficit of what he should have.
Now the eldest son had been there the whole time, just like those other generals, and never asked for nothing, never expected nothing, never even thought about getting anything from God or from the Father. And so in doing so, they got jealous just when the other one had the faith enough to ask.
When we ask God for things, we should ask for the whole thing.
Yeah.
Not just like, we'll have to title this later, but I want you to share that story in just a second that you shared about Mussolini, because what it made me think about was the story where Elisha is working with this king. 2 Kings 13, listen to this. This king's surrounded by a bunch of, he's in a situation he can't get out of. And this is verse 15 where it picks up. 2 Kings 13:15. Elisha told him, get a bow and some arrows. And the king did as he was told. Elisha told him, put your hands on the bow. And Elisha laid his own hands over the king's hands. Then he commanded, open the eastern window. And the king opened it. Then he said, shoot. So he shot an arrow. Elisha proclaimed, this is the Lord's arrow, an arrow of victory over Aram, for you will completely conquer the Arameans. Then he said, now pick up the other arrows and strike them against the grounds. So the king picked them up and struck the ground 3 times. But the man of God was angry with him. You never want to have that happen. I know I don't want Cochino to ever be angry with me. Elisha said, you should have struck the ground 5 or 6 times. Then you would have beaten Aram until it was entirely destroyed. But now you will only be victorious 3 times. So as the king obeyed, but his obedience was a statistical deficit of what he should have. And you were telling me, I think this ties into prayer. Tell that story you're telling about Mussolini. And as we, I think if I could prime everyone what we're about to hear, when we ask God for things, we should ask for the whole thing.
Yeah. Not
just like you strike the ground 3 times and you only got 3 pieces. You just struck the ground 6 times. You could have struck the ground 10 times and you got 10 pieces. Yeah. So what's that story you were telling me before?
So yeah, Mussolini, very interesting story. They were conquering territories and they had an island that they had conquered. And this private walks up to him at dinner with other generals. And this is the kind of thing, if you interrupt this dinner, you could be just taken out back and shot. Like, it's like, you don't do this. Don't do it. This guy boldly approaches, right? Interesting, right? That he boldly approached
Hebrews 4.
The throne, right?
Yeah.
And he says to Mussolini, I want you to give me the island we just conquered. And Mussolini kind of looks at him, thinks for a second, pulls out the deed, signs it over to him, and hands it to him. The guy walks off. The other generals are baffled, and they say, why did you do that? And Mussolini just said, well, he honored me with the magnitude of his request and then went back to eating. Yeah. And so that's what I've been hearing. So you guys know Megan. I'm getting married soon.
Congrats.
And thank you. She's wonderful.
Okay, so I wanna kind of stop right there for a second. I want y'all, if y'all listening, I want y'all to pay attention to what he just said. The first guy, which is the owner of the platform or the owner of the channel, Taylor of the podcast Deep End, he gave a story about how in the Bible this king was listening to the prophet, and the prophet told him to slam the arrow on the ground, and the guy slammed the arrow on the ground 3 times, and the prophet got angry with him. The prophet said, why did you only do it 3 times? He said, if you would have done it more times, you would have utterly destroyed them. But now you're only going to beat them 3 times. And so the other guy, Mr. Dr. Cochini, he gave a story about how Mussolini, which was the Italian dictator in the early years, right? Is a big request takes big faith. That's true. That's it. That's the whole premise. But Mussolini was in this big town hall meeting, or not town hall, but a meeting with all the governors and different things like that. And one of the small, local generals or whatever or just a lieutenant or whatever, asked for the island that they had just conquered. Asked for the deed to the island they had just conquered. And Mussolini, the dictator, thought about it and then handed it over, signed off the deed, and gave it to him. And when the other generals were looking like, yo, why'd you just do that? And Mussolini said, he honored me with the magnitude, with the largeness, with the grandeur of his request. Okay? And so that is how God views us. He views us the same way. If you look at the story of the story of the prodigal son got blessed. The prodigal son asked for what he wanted. He got it. He went and squandered it. Came back and got promoted, right? Or came back and got celebrated. Now the eldest son had been there the whole time, just like those other generals, and never asked for nothing. Never expected nothing, never even thought about getting anything from God or from the Father. And so in doing so, they got jealous, just like the generals did. Got jealous when the other one had the faith enough to ask. God is not intimidated by your requests. When you say, God, I want this and I want that. God, I need this and I need that. God, I want this type of wife. God, I want this type of husband. God, I want this type of vehicle. God, I want these type of children. I want this type of ministry. He's not intimidated by your requests. But just like Titus said in the chat, big request takes big faith. So you have to understand and recognize that God will supply your needs, that God will give you what you desire. God will, if you have the faith for it, God will move that mountain. You understand? So that is something that I like how they started this conversation, and it's going to continue to tumble into better and better conversation. So pay attention. Put a thumbs up in the chat if you're getting everything so far. And again, I appreciate all y'all for being here.
You say that with your lips, but your heart is far from me. I got a heart after God, but the mind of a zombie. Cause when I get around that same sin, I turn to a junkie. If I keep feeling the drug test, how can I?